Hey, welcome back. Today I made caramel delights, Samoas, whatever you call them, but there's wheat in it. I do want to give a disclaimer real quick. So it's supposed to be a vanilla cookie base, but I heavy fuck with shortbread, so I've made shortbread. Anyway, today I'm going to show you how to make 31 of these with about 20 milligrams each. As always, I started off by weighing out my weed. I'm going for about 620 milligrams total, and here's the equation I use for dosing. Then I set my oven to 240, and while that's preheating, I'll start breaking up my weed. I just break my nugs up into smaller pieces rather than grinding it because I notice the weed flavor comes through a lot more when you do grind it. When the oven is ready, you'll stick that in for about 35 minutes, and while it's decarbing, we'll start melting our butter. We'll add half a cup of water and 3/4 a cup of butter to a saucepan. I'll melt this on a low temperature. I want this to be at a steady 185 to 200 degree range before we add in the decarbed weed. Once we add in that decarbed weed, you'll just cook it for about 2.5 to 3 hours, stirring it about every 30 minutes or so and checking regularly to make sure it's staying in that 185 to 200 degree range. When the butter is finished cooking, you'll just strain out your weed. You can already see that there's a layer of butter starting to form on top of that water, but I like to put a lid on mine and stick it in the fridge to help that butter solidify a little bit quicker. This is what your finished butter will look like. I just grab a knife and cut that top layer to make it a little bit easier to get the butter out. I like to weigh my butter at the end to see how much I came out with. You can add a little bit of regular butter if you need to, but I happen to get just over 4 ounces, which is perfect. Now we'll begin our shortbread. So I left my butter out for about an hour to soften and then just used a whisk to cream that butter until it was light and fluffy. Next I'm adding in 1/4 a cup plus 2 extra tablespoons of powdered sugar, and I'm whisking that until it is equally light and fluffy. Next I'll add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract and whisk that to combine. Next I'm adding an 1/8 teaspoon of baking powder and an 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt and whisking that to combine as well. And finally, you'll add 1 1/4 cup of flour and mixing that to combine. I switched to a spatula to make it a little bit easier to mix, and you'll see after a couple of minutes it starts forming a pretty cohesive dough. Then we'll transfer that dough onto a piece of parchment paper. I put one on top too to make it a little bit easier to roll out. I'm using a rolling pin, and you just want to roll this flat until it is about 1/8 inch in thickness all the way across. Then you'll chill this in the fridge until it's stiffened up and ready to be cut. I'm using biscuit cutters, but you can just use any circles that you have. You just need a smaller one and a larger one. You'll cut out the large circles first, get as many as you can out of your dough that you've rolled out, and then you just follow that up by cutting out small circles inside of those large circles. I move my finished cookies onto a baking sheet and leave that in the fridge to stay cool while I'm cutting out all the other ones. After you roll out the extra dough, you want to make sure you're chilling it in between cutting out any of your cookies, and just repeat this rolling and cutting process until you can't cut any more cookies out of your dough. I got about 31 of them. I preheat my oven to 350, and while that's preheating, keep your dough in the fridge so it stays cool until you bake it. You'll bake it for about 10 to 12 minutes or until it is lightly done and a little bit golden on the edges. Next, I'm toasting 2.5 cups of sweetened coconut flakes. I just heat my oven to 375 and toast it for about 15 or so minutes until it is golden brown. Then I get a large double boiler ready to melt our caramel topping or caramel. So I'm adding 2 cups of caramel into this bowl, in addition to 3 tablespoons of milk and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. You'll just stir this mixture to help it melt until it is fully liquefied. Then we'll add in our toasted coconut and mix that until all of the coconut is covered. Make sure you scrape the bottom and move some of that caramel mixture up to the top until everything is evenly coated like this. Next, I'm using a fork to add our topping to our cookies. You just want to press it on and then kind of rotate it with your fingers to make sure you're getting all of the top covered with this coconut mixture. Full disclosure, this takes about 30 minutes or so to do all of the cookies. I leave it on the double boiler with the heat turned off just to help keep that caramel mixture a little bit softened throughout the process. Here they are all finished, and as they cool, the caramel mixture will kind of solidify with the cookie and it stays on like you see here. Next, we'll get another double boiler ready to melt our chocolate. I'm adding 1 1/4 cups of dark chocolate chips and about a tablespoon of coconut oil. Then you'll just mix this over the heat until it is all melted together. Then you'll just dip the bottom of all of your cookies into the chocolate. Make sure you kind of wiggle it around to get that whole shortbread cookie covered if you can. I scraped the bottom of mine with a fork to make sure it's a thin layer and then set it on a piece of parchment paper until it hardens. Lastly, we just need to do our chocolate drizzle on top, so I used all the remaining chocolate that I had and put it into a piping bag. You can use a Ziploc bag and just kind of drizzled it over the top of all of them until they all have a couple of lines on them. Leave them out until the chocolate has hardened and you are good to go. Like I said, these should be about 20 milligrams each, but with homemade edibles it is hard to tell, so just eat half and wait a while if you're unsure. If you guys make these at home, I would love to see pictures. You can find me on Instagram. And as always, thank you so much for watching.